The Chore Boy's Diary. Detective Joya Banks hadn't stepped foot in Mason Ridge, Alabama for over 20 years, not since the summer her best friend, Ellis Whitaker, vanished without a trace during a church retreat. Now, back in her hometown for her mother's funeral, she finds an old diary tucked in a hollowed-out Bible under the bed. The first entry reads, "If I die, it's Deacon Harold's fault. And Mama knows." Quick heads up before we jump in. If you're into real stories, strange disappearances, and the kind of truths people try to bury, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. All right, let's get into it. Joya Banks, a seasoned NYPD detective, returns to her deeply religious southern hometown to bury her estranged mother. But grief turns to suspicion when she discovers a decades-old diary written by her missing childhood friend, revealing not only abuse at the hands of the church's beloved deacon, but her own mother's role in covering it up. As Joya reopens the cold case the town long buried, she finds herself entangled in a web of generational silence, church politics, and a family legacy darker than she ever imagined. With every chapter of the diary, another layer of her childhood unravels, and someone in Mason Ridge will do anything to keep the past buried. Joya Banks stood outside the little white house on Pecan Lane, her badge tucked deep in her bag, her coat wrapped tight against the April wind. Mason Ridge hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same wrought iron fence curling at the corners, same silence between neighbors that once held a whole town together by fear, not trust. The house looked smaller than she remembered, more crooked, as if it had grown tired of holding secrets. She unlocked the door with the rusted key the funeral home had mailed her, and the scent hit her immediately: dust, old fabric softener, and something else beneath it. Something damp and sour, like sorrow left too long in a sealed box. Inside, the living room was frozen in time. The plastic was still on the furniture. A plastic orchid stood on the coffee table beside a dusty Bible and 2 unopened condolence cards. She didn't bother reading them. Joya made her way to the back bedroom, her mother's room. She opened the blinds and watched the sunlight spill across the faded quilt. Her heart thumped slowly. The silence was heavier in this room. Her mother, Velma Banks, had died alone. A neighbor found her after 3 days. Stroke, they said. Peaceful. Joya doubted that. Nothing about her mother had ever been peaceful. On the dresser sat a jewelry box, mostly empty, a framed church photo, and a little white Bible with gold trim one she didn't recognize. It wasn't the kind they gave out at baptisms. It was too thick. She picked it up. It felt strange in her hands, too heavy. The kind of heavy that meant something was hidden inside. She opened it. The inside pages were glued together at the edges. Carefully, she peeled them back, fingers slow but steady, until a compartment revealed itself. Inside, a tiny composition notebook lay flat, worn at the edges, its blue cover faded to gray. She opened the front page. A name in shaky pencil. This belongs to Ellis Whitaker. Don't read unless you want to know everything. Her breath caught in her chest. Ellis, the chore boy. The one who used to sneak her candy during sermons. The one who harmonized with her in the pews. The one who went missing at 13 years old and was never found. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in 20 years. Her eyes dropped to the first entry. June 3rd, 1997. If I die, it's Deacon Harold's fault. And Mama knows. She act like she don't see it. But she know. They all do. The floor felt like it shifted beneath her. Joya sat down hard on the edge of the bed. She read the entry again, then flipped ahead. Page after page filled with dates, notes, and doodles, a spiral into fear. Names she recognized. Names the town still held in high regard. Her hand trembled. Her mother had hidden this. Her mother had known. The silence in the house deepened. She could almost hear Ellis's voice cracking, nervous, that soft lisp he hadn't yet grown out of. They said he wandered off during the church trip to Lake Dorset, that he probably drowned. They held a memorial without a body, and the town moved on. But Joya hadn't. She closed the diary and held it tight against her chest. Something inside her shifted rage, maybe, or the sting of truth brushing against a long-numbed wound. Outside, a neighbor's screen door creaked open and shut. A dog barked in the distance. The world kept moving, as if Ellis had never existed. But now she had his voice again, and Mason Ridge was going to remember. The next morning came gray and still, like the town knew she was about to start asking questions. Joya sat at the kitchen table, her mother's kettle wheezing faintly on the stove. The diary lay open beside her coffee cup, its pages now creased with her fingerprints, her highlighter smudges, and a yellow post-it noting every name that meant something. Deacon Harold Morgan, still the head of St. Luke's Baptist Church, still preaching sermons about purity and righteous suffering, still standing in the same pulpit where Ellis used to sing every Sunday before he disappeared. Joya stared at the name for a long time. She turned the page again. June 10th, 1997. He said if I told, no one would believe me. Said boys like me, it confused. But I ain't confused. I just want to go home. I hate staying late to practice. Ain't no music. Ain't no piano. Just him. And Mama tell me to hush when I say, I don't want to sing no more. Her jaw clenched. She remembered Ellis dragging his feet through the choir room doors, his voice always hoarse on Mondays. How he started flinching when Deacon Harold patted his back. How quiet he got the summer before he vanished. Joya hadn't known what any of it meant then. She was only 13. Now the sign screamed. She snapped the diary shut and stood, the chair legs scraping loud against the kitchen tile. She didn't have a badge here. Didn't have jurisdiction, but she didn't need one. She had Ellis's words. She had her own memories. And she had the right kind of rage. The kettle whistled full now, a piercing cry. Joya turned off the stove, grabbed her coat, and headed out. St. Luke's Baptist Church sat at the edge of town like a monument that time refused to question. White steeple, red brick, still pristine, like it hadn't been touched since '85. The parking lot was near empty. Just a few rusted Buicks and a silver Dodge Charger that gleamed like someone still had something to prove. She walked up the steps slowly, the old wood groaning beneath her boots. Inside, the sanctuary was hollow, dim. The scent of lemon oil and stale hymn books hit her like memory. Rows of pews faced the pulpit like they always had. Light from the stained glass filtered onto the carpet, casting long shadows shaped like crucifixes and doves. At the altar stood Deacon Harold, alone, still tall, still trim in his pinstripe suit, hair thinner now but slicked back in the same cheap oil he used when she was a child. He turned when he heard her footsteps, blinking behind thick glasses. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice warm but wary. Joya didn't smile. "You remember me, Deacon?" He squinted. "Well, now, I'll be. Joya Banks, Velma's girl. I heard about your mama. Shame, real shame. We been praying." "I bet," she said, stepping closer. "Long time since I been in here. Well, doors are always open to you. Mason Ridge ain't forgot you made detective up in New York. Your mama used to." "You remember Ellis Whitaker?" she cut in. His smile flickered, just for a second. "Course I do," he said slowly. "Sweet boy. Terrible what happened to him. You were close, huh?" Deacon Harold crossed his arms. "Well, I was close with all the choir children. That was my ministry." She stared at him. "You ever read the book of Luke, chapter 12? He blinked. "Of course. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed," she recited, "or hidden that will not be made known." Something shifted in his eyes. "You here for a reason, Miss Banks?" Joya reached into her coat and pulled out the diary, but didn't hand it over. She held it in her palm, just enough for him to see the old, cracked cover. "Ellis wrote some things," she said. "Things about what happened in this church. With you." Deacon Harold's face hardened. "You got no right. I got every right. He was my friend. And my mother knew, which means she helped hide it. Just like the rest of y'all." He stepped down from the altar, his footsteps slow, measured. "That diary's been hidden a long time for a reason," he said, voice lower now. "And it ain't nothing but the ramblings of a troubled child. That boy had demons." "No," Joya said. "He had predators." A door creaked open at the back of the sanctuary. Someone had been listening. A soft voice spoke from the shadows. "Ellis used to cry after practice." Joya turned. An old woman stood in the doorway, gray wig, bent back, leaning on a floral cane. Miss Hattie James, longtime usher and neighborhood eyes and ears. Her voice shook. "I cleaned the choir room. I saw the bruises. I ain't say nothing, but I knew." "We all did." Deacon Harold turned to her, his face like stone. "You best be careful, Hattie." But the woman didn't flinch. "Times changed, Harold," she said, "and you ain't no god." Gian's heart pounded. The silence cracked like ice. And just like that, the wall of silence around Ellis Ray Whitaker began to crumble, one voice, one truth at a time. The diner on Willow Street hadn't changed since 1998. The same cracked red booths, the same chipped counter stools, the same half-lit sign that used to flicker, "We fry everything," until the air burned out. Joya sat in the far booth, the diary beside her untouched plate of grits. Her spoon clinked against the chipped ceramic coffee cup as she stirred her second refill, eyes fixed on the doorway. She'd left the church in silence after Miss Hattie's confession. No shouting, no threats, just the charged stillness of truth dragging itself out of the dark, like a splinter finally rising to the surface. Now she waited for someone else. Melinda Whitaker, Ellis's younger sister, the one who didn't cry at the memorial, the one who stared at the lake like she could still hear his voice in the ripples. The bell above the door jingled, and there she was. Melinda had grown into her mother's face-sharp cheekbones, stormy brown eyes, always looking like she was half a step from cussing someone out. She wore a worn leather jacket and jeans, her braids pulled back in a tight bun. She walked with a purpose Joya recognized, like every step cost her something. They hadn't spoken since Joya left town at 18. Melinda slid into the booth across from her, arms folded. "You got a nerve, showing up after all this time." Joya nodded slowly. "I do." Melinda's eyes dropped to the diary. She didn't touch it. "You found it?" "In my mama's Bible. Hidden." Melinda's jaw clenched. She knew. She knew what he did to Ellis. But she stayed quiet. For her church. For her damn position in the women's ministry. "She wasn't the only one," Joya said softly. "Miss Hattie said she saw bruises." Melinda shook her head. "Bruises wasn't even the worst of it." Joya waited. Melinda exhaled. That summer before he disappeared, Ellis started sleepwalking, crying in his sleep, waking up screaming sometimes. I tried to get him to talk, but he always said he was fine. Always wanted to go sing at rehearsal, though. Saji didn't want to disappoint Deacon Harold. Her voice cracked on the name. "I begged Mama to pull him out the choir. She slapped me. Said I was jealous, 'cause I couldn't sing." Joya looked down at the table. Her fingers tapped once, twice on the wood. "You think your Mama knew too?" "I know she did," Melinda hissed. "She washed his clothes. She saw the blood once. Said it was a nosebleed. But Ellis never had nosebleeds." She paused, then leaned in close. "Joya, that man killed my brother. I know he did. He threatened him. And Mama told him to keep quiet, told him it was God testing him." A sick silence bloomed between them. Joya opened the diary to a folded page. She slid it across. June 27th, she said. 3 days before the church trip. Melinda read, eyes narrowing. June 27th, 1997. I told him I was going to tell. He laughed. Sighed I'd drown before anybody believed me. Sighed Mason Ridge, don't listen to little black boys who sing like girls. Sighed I wasn't going to make it to July, but I am. I will. And if I don't, I hope Joya finds this. Or Melinda. Tell them I love them. Tell them I tried. Melinda's hands trembled. He knew, she whispered. He knew he wasn't coming back. A tear slid down her cheek, slow and defiant. I've waited 20 years to hear somebody else say it, she said. To say he didn't run away, didn't fall in the lake. He was silenced, Joya said, and the town helped cover it up. Melinda wiped her cheek with the heel of her palm. What are you going to do now, Detective Banks? Joya leaned forward, her voice steady. I'm going to find proof, and I'm going to burn this town's illusions down to the foundation. Melinda looked at her long and hard. Then you better start with the lake. Joya froze. What about the lake? Melinda's voice dropped to a whisper. Ellis was terrified of water. He couldn't swim. Wouldn't even go near the deep end at the pool. So why would he wander off into a lake he was scared of? Joya stared at her. You think his body's still there? I think that's why they chose it. That lake don't give things back easy. The diner bell jingled again. Both women turned. An older man in a Mason Ridge Parks and Rec uniform stood in the doorway. He locked eyes with Melinda, then dipped his chin once. She stood. I called in a favor, she said. He's the one who drains the lake every spring for cleanup. Says he found something 2 years ago, but was told to keep it quiet. Joya's pulse surged. Melinda looked her dead in the eye. You ready to dig, Detective? Joya stood, grabbed the diary, and slid it back in her coat. Let's go find Ellis. They reached Lake Dorset just after noon. The sky had turned the color of dull metal, and the wind coming off the water smelled like rotting leaves and iron. The lake stretched long and narrow through a patch of woods behind the old summer camp once run by the church. Half the cabins were collapsed, now moss-covered skeletons sagging beneath vines. Nature had started reclaiming everything the town left behind. Joya parked her car on the gravel shoulder and stepped out, the diary zipped in her coat pocket, her boots crunching through damp grass. Melinda followed silently. They said little on the drive. Waiting near the rusted boathouse stood Dennis Rayner, the Parks and Rec man Melinda had called. He was a squat man in his 60s, with deep creases in his cheeks and a voice like someone who hadn't been believed in a long time. You the one from New York? He asked. Joya nodded. Detective Banks. He glanced over her shoulder. Didn't expect someone like you to come dig through old dirt. Ellis Whitaker wasn't dirt, Joya said, steady. He was my friend. Dennis sighed and looked toward the lake. Come on. It's still there. They followed him to the edge of the water. A dock had rotted away, leaving only jagged stumps. He pointed out across the surface to a narrow inlet that curved behind a thicket of trees. That stretch right there. It don't get touched. Too shallow for boats, too far from the camp. When I cleared algae back in 22, I found something strange tangled in the roots. Looked like bones. A rib cage, maybe. Thought it was a deer at first. And you didn't report it? Joya asked. I did. Sheriff sent 2 deputies. They took one look, told me it was probably just wildlife remains, and told me to leave it alone. Next week, new roots were dragged over it, like somebody didn't want it found. Joya's jaw tightened. Show me. They climbed into Dennis's flat-bottomed maintenance boat, Joya gripping the rail with one hand, the other never leaving her coat pocket. The small motor sputtered to life and groaned as it pushed them across the dark surface. Melinda sat opposite her, eyes fixed on the tree line. This was the last place I saw him. standing right there, by the canteen window. He waved at me, said he'd come find me after practice. The boat curved around the inlet and slowed to a crawl. Dennis shut off the motor and reached for a long aluminum pole. "It's here," he muttered. He began jabbing gently into the thick weeds and submerged roots, parting moss-covered tangles with practiced care. A minute passed, then another. Water slapped the sides of the boat. Then, thud, something gave beneath the pole. Dennis froze. Same spot. Joya leaned over, heart pounding. How deep? Couple feet, maybe 3, but the mud's thick. Joya looked at him. "Can you drain it?" He hesitated. "Takes a permit." "I'm not asking about permits." Dennis looked between her and Melinda, then exhaled. "I can drain it tonight. After hours, quiet." Melinda leaned forward. "And if we find something?" Joya's voice was like steel. "Then we make noise." That night, long after dusk fell over Mason Ridge and the town lights dimmed behind the trees, they returned. Dennis had pulled an old gas-powered water pump from the storage shed. Its hose stretched into the inlet, humming low and constant as the lake began to recede by inches. They stood under a single portable floodlight Dennis had rigged up, casting harsh yellow shadows across the mud. At 1:17 a.m., the pump sputtered, and the water gave way. Joya stepped forward, her boots sinking into cold muck. She followed the exposed tree roots until she saw something jutting from the dark soil. Bone, not animal, small, human. She crouched low, heart hammering, and brushed the mud aside. They're fragments of a rib cage, a piece of denim caught on a root, a decayed shoelace threaded through the edge of something buried deeper. Her hand trembled. Melinda dropped beside her, covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Joya stood slowly, eyes burning, her voice barely above breath. "They left him here." Melinda's eyes filled. "They buried him in water like he didn't matter." Joya turned to Dennis. "You have a tarp?" He nodded. "Then get it. We're calling in a forensic tech from Birmingham, first thing in the morning. And this time, they're going to listen." Dennis stared at the remains, face pale. "You think that's really him?" Joya didn't answer. She just pulled the soaked diary from her coat, held it against her chest, and stared at the boy who had once sung in pews lined with secrets. Now he would finally be heard. By mid-morning, yellow tape ringed the inlet like a noose around the town's secrets. A mobile forensic van from Birmingham rumbled into the clearing, followed by 2 unmarked sedans. Technicians in gray jumpsuits worked in hushed formation, brushing soil from bone with reverent precision. A drone buzzed overhead, cataloging the scene. Joya stood at the edge of the cordon, arms folded tight against her chest, the diary in a Ziploc bag under her coat. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. The moment Ellis's ribcage surfaced in the mud, something in her chest cracked open. Now she couldn't stop hearing his voice soft, nervous, calling her name from across choir practice rooms and church basements long gone. Detective Banks? She turned. A tall black woman in her early 40s approached, clipboard in hand. Her badge gleamed. Detective Simone Garner, Jefferson County Homicide. "You the one who called this in?" "I am." Simone's eyes flicked over her. "You local?" "Born and bruised," Joya replied. "I'm NYPD, but this is personal." Simone nodded slowly. "Well, you were right to call us. These are definitely human remains. Juvenile. Partial clothing matches a missing persons report from 1997. Name listed was Ellis Whitaker." Joya finished. Simone raised an eyebrow. "You knew him?" "I sang beside him, the summer he disappeared." A pause passed between them. Simone looked back at the team. "It'll take time to confirm ID, but you know as well as I do boys don't just end up buried under lake mud without help." "They called it a drowning," Joya muttered. "Held a service without a body. Town was real quick to let it go." Simone pursed her lips. And now? Now they're about to choke on it. Joya left the lake just before noon and headed into town. She stopped at the gas station for a black coffee and a burner phone. Hers had been buzzing nonstop local reporters, already catching wind that something had been found at the old camp. She needed a clean line. She didn't call the church. She called the sheriff's office. Sheriff Clay Marston had held that badge since she was in middle school, white, fat-mouthed, and always polite in a way that stung. He was one of those Southern men who smiled at your mama while stepping on your neck. She asked for a meeting. She didn't wait for permission. The sheriff's office sat on a shaded street near the post office, with the same faded mural of Mason Ridge's founders painted on the side wall. Joya walked in and was greeted by the familiar creak of linoleum and the faint scent of burnt coffee. A young deputy looked up from his desk. "Can I help?" "Oh, Detective Banks?" She nodded. "Sheriff in?" The deputy nodded stiffly and led her down the hall. Sheriff Marston was exactly the same ruddy face, combed over hair. That same too-slow way of talking that always made you feel like he knew something you didn't. He stood from his desk as she entered. "Well, I'll be. Joya Velma Banks. You come to close a file?" "I came to open one, actually." His brow twitched. She dropped the Ziploc bag on his desk. The diary inside landed with a dull slap. "You remember Ellis Whitaker?" He stared at the notebook like it had teeth. "What about him?" "He didn't drown." His silence was cold and long. "We found skeletal remains in the lake this morning," Joya continued. "Clothing matches the original report. We'll have DNA confirmation soon. I have statements, evidence, and motive outlined in that diary." The sheriff sat back slowly. "You saying this town let a child get murdered on our watch?" "I'm saying someone in this town made sure no one watched." He eyed her. "That's a heavy accusation, coming from a guest." "I paid rent in pain here, Sheriff," she snapped. "I got receipts." He drummed his fingers on the desk. "Ellis's case was handled by my deputy at the time," he said. "You remember Jake Sims?" Joya stiffened. "Your son." The room shifted. Sheriff Marston's voice lost its drawl. "Jake did the initial canvassing. Signed off on the missing persons report. Even searched the camp." "And who told Dennis Rayner to drop it when he found bones in 22? The silence stretched. The sheriff stood slowly, one palm flat on the desk. "You came here for justice, fine. But don't go poking old wounds, like they ain't attached to people still living in this town. Some of them got families, legacies. Ellis had one too." She turned to leave. As her hand touched the doorknob, he spoke again. "Don't let your anger make you reckless, Joya. Mason Ridge is full of people who know how to stay quiet." She didn't turn around. "I'm not afraid of quiet," she said. "I'm afraid of who taught it to scream." Outside, Joya's phone buzzed the burner line. Melinda's voice crackled through. "Someone broke into Mama's shed. Ellis's old things are gone. The shoebox, the tapes, everything." Joya's pulse skipped. "Stay inside," she said. "Lock your doors." "Do you think it was him?" Melinda whispered. "Deacon Harold?" Joya looked toward the steeple of St. Luke's in the distance, rising like a blade above the trees. "I think whoever it was," she said, "just told us we're getting close." The shed behind Melinda Whitaker's house looked like it had been punched in the gut. The door hung crooked on one hinge, lock split clean in two, wood splintered where someone had forced it open with something heavy. The inside smelled like wet pine and gasoline. Sawdust dusted the floor. Joya crouched low inside the shed, scanning the remaining boxes. Christmas ornaments, rotting textbooks, plastic crates full of baby clothes. But the shoebox, the one Melinda said held Ellis's old cassette tapes, photos, and a school folder, was gone. Melinda stood outside with crossed arms, pacing beneath the flickering motion light. "I should have brought it inside. I should have locked it up." "This wasn't your fault," Joya said. Somebody knew, Melinda whispered. Somebody knew we were getting close. The only people who knew about that box were me and Mama. Joya stood. Your Mama ever talk about who Ellis was close to at the church? Melinda gave her a strange look. Besides you? Besides me. She thought for a moment. There was that other boy. Quiet. Always sat in the front pew. Real sweet. His mama was the church secretary. Eugene. No, Elwood. Elwood Daniels, Joya muttered. Yeah, that's it. Joya's breath caught. She remembered Elwood Daniels' awkward smile. Always humming the piano scales before practice. Always taking the long way out of rehearsal, like he didn't want to be alone. He'd testified during the original inquiry in '97 that he didn't see Ellis leave the lake area. Claimed he was in the cabin playing cards. Now she wondered how many lies were baked into that summer. It didn't take much to track him down. Mason Ridge wasn't a town that let its people leave easy. Most of them aged into the same corners they were born in. Elwood Daniels, now 38, worked nights as a security guard at the Mason Ridge High School. By day, he lived in the basement apartment of his mother's house, same house, 3 blocks behind St. Luke's, same lace curtains in the window. Joya parked across the street and walked up the narrow pathway. She knocked twice. The door cracked open fast. Elwood blinked at her, slow and unsure. Thinner than she remembered. Face tight, beard uneven, eyes like someone who had too many sleepless nights and not enough air. Detective Banks? He said. You remember me? Yeah, he said slowly. I remember your voice. You used to sing Wade in the Water. Joya gave a faint nod. You got a minute? Elwood stepped aside. The living room was clean but sparse. 2 folding chairs. A small TV on a milk crate. Gospel music played faintly from an old stereo, like the walls needed it to keep breathing. Joya sat across from him, her fingers laced. I'm not here to accuse you, she said, but I need to know what really happened that summer. Elwood stared down at his hands. You found him, didn't you, Ellis? Joya didn't flinch. We found remains, Lake Dorset. He nodded slowly, a bitter breath leaving his lips. I knew it. All this time, I knew he didn't run off. You testified that you were in the cabin that day. I was. You sure? Elwood's eyes filled. No, I lied. I had to. Joya sat up straighter. Why? He swallowed hard. Because I saw something. I saw Deacon Harold pull Ellis aside behind the mess hall. I saw Ellis try to walk away, and I saw Harold grab him. Why didn't you come forward then? He looked at her, tears streaking down his cheek. Because right after that, Jake Sims came to our door. Told my mama if I kept saying wild things, they'd say I was acting out and send me to a facility in Birmingham. Said they'd dig up old truancy records and make it look like I needed placement. My mama cried for 2 days straight. After that, I said what they told me to say. Joya's hands curled into fists. They used fear, she whispered. They used everything, Elwood said. This town don't run on truth, detective. It runs on shame and silence. Ellis was the first one to fight back, and they buried him for it. Joya pulled the diary from her coat. You ever see this? He took it in his hands, like it was sacred. Yeah, he said. We passed it between us. A few of us kept notes, drawings, little prayers. Ellis called it his truth book. Said if anything happened to him, it'd speak louder than we ever could. Do you remember who else wrote in it? Elwood's face changed. Yeah, he said, his voice going faint. Carmen Lynn, too. She had the other tapes. Joya blinked. Who's Carmen Lynn? Elwood hesitated. She was in the choir. She left town after Ellis went missing. Her parents sent her to live with cousins in Florida. Said she was acting up. But before she left, she gave me something. He stood and walked to the back room. Returned with a velvet pouch. Inside, a small cassette labeled in faded ink. July 1st, 1997, practice room, 4:12 p.m. Elwood set it gently in Joya's hand. "I never played it," he said. "I was too scared, but maybe now's the time." Joya looked down at it, a knot twisted in her gut. "I need to find Carmen Lynn." Elwood nodded. "You find her, you'll find the rest of the story." Outside, a car rolled slowly past the house. Tinted windows. A pause at the curb. Joya tensed. Watched it disappear. "Elwood," she said quietly, "keep your door locked tonight." Back in her car, she slipped the cassette into a handheld player she found at the thrift store years ago for cold case recon. She pressed play. At first, just static. Then the click of a door. Soft footsteps. A voice Ellis's breathing hard. Another voice. Older. Deacon Harold, whispering something. Then a sharp smack. A yelp. And then Ellis's voice clear, cracked with fear. "You said if I sang good, you'd stop." Joya slammed the stop button. Tears burned hot behind her eyes. The town hadn't just buried Ellis. They'd recorded the proof. And someone had tried to make sure it never saw the light of day. The cassette tape sat on the motel nightstand like it could explode. Joya stared at it from across the room, arms wrapped around her knees, phone glowing faint in her lap. The sound still echoed in her skull Ellis's voice. The whimper, that slap, the tremble in his tone when he begged the man to stop. She'd heard a lot in her years on NYPD. Interrogation rooms, wiretaps, confessionals whispered behind one-way glass. But this was different. This was a child unraveling in real time, and the man behind it still stood in a pulpit every Sunday. She pressed record on her burner phone and copied the tape audio straight into the voice memos. Insurance. In Mason Ridge, evidence had a tendency to disappear, and Joya wasn't planning on becoming another buried truth. The next morning, she met Melinda on the back steps of the church. It was still early, the sun still pushing through fog. A few cars lined the gravel lot. Bible study would start in an hour. The choir would rehearse tonight. Melinda had a red thermos in one hand and tired fury in her eyes. "You found Carmen Lynn yet?" "Not yet," Joya said. "But I've got something else." She pressed play on the voice memo. Ellis's voice filled the air. Melinda flinched. When the recording ended, neither of them spoke for a moment. "I knew he was scared," Melinda whispered. "But I didn't know it was like that." Joya leaned in. "This isn't just abuse. This is a recorded crime. He didn't just threaten Ellis. He hurt him. And we can prove it." Melinda glanced toward the chapel doors. "And what if no one cares?" Joya smiled grimly. "Then we make them care." By noon, Joya sat across from Detective Simone Garner in a private room at the Birmingham precinct. The recording played twice. Garner didn't interrupt either time. When it ended, she exhaled through her nose. "Where'd you get the original?" "From a witness. A former choir member. Said there's more out there. A girl named Carmen Lynn may have kept additional tapes." "And this was recorded July 1st, 1997? Exactly 3 days before Ellis was reported missing." Simone leaned back. "We're not dealing with a missing child anymore. This is now a homicide." Joya nodded. "And a cover-up." Simone tapped her pen. "I'll have my team issue a formal request to the DA's office. But we'll need statements, sworn ones, from your witness. From anyone else who knew." "They'll talk," Joya said. "One already has. Another gave me the diary." Simone studied her a moment. "You know this won't be simple. Church power in these towns runs deep. You try to knock down that steeple, you better be ready to take hits from every deacon, choir mother, and politician whose mama ever sat in the third pew." Joya's jaw set. "I've already been hit." Simone smiled. "Good. Then let's swing back." Back in Mason Ridge, news moved faster than gossip. That night, As choir rehearsal filled St. Luke's sanctuary with harmonies, Joya and Melinda stood in the back pew, silent. The voices sounded the same as they always had, soft, yearning, holy. But now, every note reminded Joya of the silence Ellis must have felt beneath it. She scanned the room. Deacon Harold wasn't on the altar. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, smiling faintly, watching, guiding. Predators didn't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they smiled from behind pulpits. Melinda leaned in. "You see her?" Joya followed her gaze to a woman near the soprano's late 30s, brown skin, almond-shaped eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. She laughed softly at something the woman next to her said. "Carmen Lynn," Joya whispered. "Yep, she came back. Rejoined the choir a few months ago. Quiet, never leads. But she's always here." Joya stepped out of the pew. Melinda grabbed her wrist. "Be careful." "I always am." That's what Ellis said too. Joya turned back. "I won't let her be next." Carmen blinked when Joya approached her after rehearsal. "Detective Banks?" she asked, lowering her choir folder. "I need to talk to you." Carmen glanced around. "Now's not really. It's about Ellis." Her face changed. Something behind her eyes locked shut. Joya saw the storm begin to rise. "Not here," Carmen whispered. They met 20 minutes later at a closed barbershop on Jefferson Avenue. Carmen worked there part-time. The chairs were covered in sheets. A single ceiling fan creaked slowly overhead. Carmen sat on the edge of the sink, clutching her purse. Joya leaned against the wall. "I didn't think anyone would ever say his name out loud again," Carmen said. "Not in this town. You knew him well?" "We were kids," she said. "But yeah, Ellis was gentle. Too gentle. He used to draw these silly cartoons in my hymn book. I still have them somewhere. He used to hum harmonies while I braided his sister's hair." Joya waited. Carmen inhaled. "That day, July 1st, I stayed late for practice too. We weren't supposed to be alone, but sometimes Deacon Harold would ask one or two of us to stay for extra guidance." Her voice cracked. "I recorded it. I didn't mean to catch anything. I was hiding the recorder in my book. My cousin gave it to me for fun. I wanted to be a singer. Thought I'd tape myself." "You still have the tape?" She hesitated, then reached into her purse. Out came an envelope worn, sealed in duct tape. Inside, a cassette and 2 Polaroids. One of Ellis's hymn book, open to a page filled with childlike sketches, and one of the practice room, the piano bench, a shadow near the corner. Barely visible, but there. Carmen's voice was just above a whisper. "That shadow? That's him." Joya stared. "You're ready to testify?" "I'm tired of being scared," Carmen said. "And Ellis deserves more than a shadow." Joya nodded, tucking the envelope gently into her coat. "Then let's give him a voice." The sky over Mason Ridge was gold with judgment. Sunday morning came with the slow toll of church bells echoing through the streets, drawing the town in like a magnet pulling iron filings from dust. St. Luke's Baptist filled fast ladies in fanned hats, men in suits too tight from pride, children told to hush and sit up straight. Everyone came to see Deacon Harold. Some came for the word. Others came for the ritual. But this Sunday, Joya Banks came for the reckoning. She stood at the back of the sanctuary in black slacks and a crisp collar, arms folded. Her NYPD badge wasn't visible, but it may as well have been stitched across her soul. Next to her stood Detective Simone Garner, plainclothed, lips pressed in a line, recorder tucked in her coat. She'd driven down again that morning, quietly. No squad cars. No press, not yet. The choir sang, "His eye is on the sparrow," their voices a gentle river. Joya didn't blink. And then he appeared. Deacon Harold Morgan, in his silver robe, walking down the center aisle like he owned the oxygen in the room. The congregation stood in reverent silence as he stepped onto the pulpit and opened his Bible with a smile that hadn't changed in 20 years. "Turn with me," he said, "to Proverbs 28-13. Joya's blood ran cold. That verse, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." He read it slow. Let it roll across the room like honey slicked with venom. Joya took a step forward. He saw her. For the first time, his smile twitched. But he kept preaching. After service, the line to greet the deacon stretched down the aisle. Some hugged him. Some whispered in his ear. None knew what was about to come. When the crowd thinned, Joya stepped into his path. Behind her, Simone watched closely. In her hand was a sealed evidence envelope. "Brother Harold," Joya said, her voice cool. He tried to step past. She didn't move. "Service was powerful today," she added. His jaw flexed. "The Lord moves as he sees fit. He sure does. Funny how his timing always lines up with subpoenas." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're going to undo a lifetime of good works because of some old tape?" "No," she said. "I think you undid it." Simone stepped forward. Her badge discreetly flashed. "Harold Morgan, you are under investigation in connection with the death of Ellis Ray Whitaker." Gasps rippled behind them. "What's this about?" someone said. "What death?" Joya raised her voice just enough. "They found Ellis in the lake. Deacon Harold was the last person seen with him." The murmurs grew. Harold's nostrils flared. "You don't know what you're doing." "I'm doing what should have been done 26 years ago," Joya said. Simone handed him the envelope. "Consider yourself officially notified. You are not to leave town." As he turned, red-faced and storm-brewing, a soft voice rang out from the pews. "I saw him drag Ellis into the back hall." All eyes turned. It was Miss Hattie Lace-Gloves on her hands, Bible in her lap, eyes glassy but defiant. "I was cleaning. He didn't see me. But I saw him." Joya turned to the room. "Anyone else?" The silence clung for a moment, and another voice, and another. "A man from the choir. Ellis told me he was scared. I should have said something. A former youth director. I saw the bruises. I told the sheriff. He told me to drop it." A woman near the back. Carmen wasn't the only girl he asked to stay late. Voices rising, one by one. Not screaming, not angry, just done with silence. Deacon Harold stumbled back into the sanctuary doors, face drained, hands trembling. As he reached the edge of the steps, he turned to Simone. "You think you can break me?" he said low. Joya answered instead. "No, but Ellis already did." That afternoon, Carmen Lynn gave her sworn statement in Birmingham. Her cassette authenticated. Elwood's testimony verified. The diary entered as corroborative evidence. Joya stood outside the precinct, staring into the warm sun, her coat open, badge finally visible. Her phone buzzed. "Melinda." "You coming back to Mama's?" she asked. "Soon. Because we found something else in the attic. Another shoebox. Not Ellis's. What was in it?" Melinda's voice went soft. "Letters. Addressed to you. From your mama. Ones she never mailed." Joya went still. "I'll be right there," she said. The attic groaned with heat and memory. Joya stood hunched beneath the sloped ceiling of her childhood home, the air heavy with insulation dust, and old insulation foam clinging to the walls like frozen breath. Cardboard boxes surrounded her, some labeled in her mother's handwriting, others just anonymous weight on the floor. In the center sat Melinda, cross-legged beside an old green milk crate, a small pile of opened envelopes in her lap. "She never mailed them," she said quietly. "All addressed to you, but none with stamps." Joya dropped to her knees beside her, throat dry. The first envelope was postmarked in the corner with only a year, 2004. Joya opened it slowly. The paper crackled like it had been waiting. Joya, I heard about your promotion to detective. Pastor Gerald said he saw your name in the Times. I'm proud of you even if I don't say it well. I was never good at that. There's a lot I wasn't good at. I keep dreaming about Ellis. Some nights he's sitting at the kitchen table, just smiling. No words. Sometimes he's older, taller, the age he'd be now, but he's still 13 in my head. Still looking at me like I let something happen. Like I turned away. I did turn away, Joya. Not just from him. From you too. I was scared. I chose the church over my own. I thought silence was protection. But now the silence is louder than anything. If you ever come home, I hope you find this. Love. Mama. Joya sat still for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. Melinda didn't speak. She just slid another letter into her lap. 2007. Joya. They asked me to give the youth ministry welcome this Sunday. I said no. I haven't set foot in that church since Carmen's mama pulled me aside and asked if I was still covering for the deacon. They know. Everyone knows. But Mason Ridge don't speak unless it's singing. And that's why people like Harold get to keep smiling. I kept the diary hidden, but I should have burned it. Maybe then I could sleep. But something told me you'd need it. That someday you'd come looking. I hope when you do, you can forgive me. Or at least understand. Fear is a heavy thing to pass down. I wore it like a coat and gave it to you without asking. I'm sorry for that, Mama. Joya wiped her face. She hadn't realized she was crying. Not the kind of cry that screamed. The kind that let grief fall like dust. Melinda placed a third letter in her lap. This one wasn't dated. The envelope was torn, like it had been opened and resealed, the paper thinner than the others. Written in blue ink, her mother's more nervous hand. Joya. They asked me if I remembered where Ellis slept, if he had a flashlight, if I saw him leave camp that night. I told them I didn't. That was a lie. I heard his door open. I heard the screen creak. I looked out the cabin window and saw him walking down toward the lake, following Deacon Harold's lantern. I told myself it was just a night prayer, that he was being guided. But deep down I knew that boy didn't want to walk that path, and I still didn't move. I stayed in bed and pulled the covers over my head like a coward, like a mother who chose peace over protection. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth. You always asked me why I stopped singing. It's because the hymns started sounding like lies. Love, Mama. Joya sat in the attic, the letters spread in her lap like confessions laid at her feet. Her mother, always so cold, so rigid in memory, had poured her guilt onto these pages in the only way she knew how, alone. She didn't want anyone to read them, Joya whispered. Melinda looked over, but she kept them. They sat in silence, the attic fan spinning faintly, as though the house itself was trying to breathe through the past. Joya finally spoke. I spent so many years hating her, for letting Ellis vanish, for pretending it wasn't real, for never saying she believed me when I said something felt wrong. She didn't deserve you, Melinda said. No, Joya replied, but maybe she knew that too. She folded the letters carefully, slid them back into their envelopes, and placed them in her shoulder bag. Now it's time to show this town how much she knew, Joya said. Because if she heard Ellis leave that cabin, someone else did too. Melinda raised an eyebrow. Who? Joya's voice dropped to a whisper. The camp nurse, Miss Dottie. She was on duty that night. Melinda sat up straighter. She still lives out near Cedar Loop. Joya's eyes hardened. Then we're paying her a visit. The house on Cedar Loop Road was buried behind overgrown wisteria and a sagging carport, its paint chipped like flaking memories. Joya parked beneath a leaning magnolia tree, headlights off. The air smelled like moss and rust. Crickets buzzed in the distance. Miss Dottie Owens had lived here since long before the camp shut down. Former nurse for St. Luke's summer ministry. Retired, widowed, no kids. The kind of woman towns like Mason Ridge never questioned. Always present, always quiet, always watching. Joya and Melinda approached the porch together. The wood creaked beneath their feet. Melinda knocked once. Inside, the porch light flicked on. The door opened a few inches, revealing a sliver of a woman in a flannel robe and house slippers. Her hair was silver now, wrapped in curlers. Her eyes, sharp and colorless behind thick glasses, squinted through the chain lock. "Can I help you?" Joya stepped forward. "Miss Dottie Owens?" "My name's Detective Joya Banks. This is Melinda Whitaker. We're here about Ellis." The name hit like a brick. The old woman's hand trembled on the chain. I don't know what you mean." "Yes," Melinda said, voice tight. "You do." For a long moment, the screen door didn't move. Then, slowly, Dottie unlatched the chain. They sat in the parlor, 3 women from 3 generations tied together by a single haunted name. The air was thick with the scent of boiled cabbage and carpet that hadn't been replaced since Reagan was in office. Miss Dottie's hands shook as she poured sweet tea into cloudy glasses. Her voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. "I wondered how long it would take before someone came knocking again." "So someone did knock before," Joya said, watching her carefully. Dottie didn't answer right away. "After he vanished, the sheriff asked me what I saw. I told him I didn't hear anything, that my trailer was too far from cabin 3. "And was that true?" Melinda asked. Dottie looked down into her lap. "No." Silence fell over the room. "I was the night nurse," she said finally. "My trailer was across the gravel path from the cabins. I used to keep the screen door cracked on warm nights. That night, I was reading. Around midnight, I heard voices, arguing." "Whose voices?" Joya asked. She hesitated. "Then Ellis and Harold Morgan." Joya's stomach twisted. "Did you see them?" "I looked out my window, saw them heading toward the lake. Deacon Harold was carrying a lantern. Ellis looked scared. Real scared. I should have followed them." "Why didn't you?" Dottie's voice broke. "Because my son had just gotten out of lockup. I was on probation at the church. One more misstep and they would have let me go. My position came with housing. Without it, we'd be homeless." She looked up at them, tears spilling now. "I told myself it was probably nothing, a late-night prayer. The deacon did those sometimes, but when I heard the splash, I knew." Melinda covered her mouth. "You heard him fall in?" Joya asked. "No, I heard him scream first, then a splash, then silence. I ran out onto the porch, but it was too dark. I didn't see nobody." "Did you tell the sheriff?" Dottie nodded slowly. "The next morning. Told him exactly what I just told you." "And what did Sheriff Marston say?" She shook her head. "He told me I must have imagined it, that I was old and tired and seeing shadows. Then he reminded me how the church helped me keep my job after my son's arrest." "So he silenced you?" "No," Dottie said bitterly. "I silenced myself." Joya leaned forward. "Would you be willing to give a statement? An affidavit?" Dottie stared at her for a long time, then nodded. "I don't got many years left, Detective. I'd like to leave knowing I helped that boy get some peace." Later, in the car, Melinda stared out the window as they drove back through the dusky backroads of Mason Ridge. "Think she's telling the truth?" she asked. Joya nodded. "Yeah, but it's not just her we need. We need the deputy who filed the report, Jake Sims." "The sheriff's son," Joya said. "He's the key to the cover-up. If Harold's the wolf, Jake held the leash." They rode in silence for a moment until Melinda said, "He lives out in the trailer park now. Got kicked off the force 3 years ago. DUI. The town don't talk about it." "Perfect," Joya muttered. "I'll pay him a visit tomorrow." Melinda turned to her. And if he won't talk? Joya stared through the windshield, her jaw set. Then I remind him what it feels like when ghosts start talking louder than you do. That night, Joya sat at the edge of her childhood bed, flipping through the last pages of Ellis's diary. Most were half-written. Scribbles. A torn page. But on the final page, faint and written in pencil almost too light to read, was a single sentence. I think someone saw me. She read it 3 times, then closed the book. Tomorrow, she would find out who else had watched, and how many more kept their eyes shut. The trailer park sat at the edge of Mason Ridge like a secret the town didn't want visitors to find. Chain-link fences leaned like drunk men. Lawn chairs sagged in puddles. Window units buzzed loud enough to drown out memory. Most of the trailers had numbers, but the one she was looking for had a Confederate flag curtain, half torn and barely covering the window. Jake Sims, former deputy, former son of the sheriff, former cover-up artist. Joya stepped out of her car, jacket zipped, Ellis's diary pressed like a second spine against her back. She didn't need her badge visible not here. Her presence alone was enough to wake ghosts. The door opened before she could knock. Jake looked worse than she expected. Gray patchy beard, red around the eyes, cheap beer on his breath even at 10 in the morning. He squinted like the daylight owed him something. I figured you'd come, he muttered. You got time to talk? She asked. He laughed dry, hollow. Talkin's the one thing I still got left. Inside, the place reeked of old socks and bad decisions. Beer cans stacked like trophies on the kitchen counter. A dusty recliner faced a muted TV. He motioned for her to sit, but she didn't. I came about Ellis Whitaker, she said plainly. Jake scratched his neck. Knew it wasn't a social call. You filed the original report. You interviewed Elwood. You helped Sheriff Marston shut the whole thing down. He looked at her, something tired flickering behind his eyes. I was 21, green, and scared out of my damn mind. Of what? Of my daddy, he said. Of the church. Of losing everything. Joya folded her arms. Ellis lost more. Jake flinched, then walked to a drawer near the sink and pulled out a thin, battered manila folder. I kept it, he said. Don't ask me why. Maybe guilt. Maybe I knew one day someone like you would come around. He handed it to her. Inside, the original statement from Elwood unredacted, full of contradictions. A second page from Carmen Lynn, signed but never included in the official record. And at the bottom, a memo from Sheriff Marston. Shut it down. Marked as accidental. Child wandered off. No follow-up required. We owe Harold. Joya's hand shook. You gonna testify? She asked. Jake slumped into the recliner like the guilt had finally caved his spine. I already lost everything, he said. What's left to protect? That boy deserves a voice, Joya said. And you owe him that. He looked up at her, eyes bloodshot but steady. I'll do it. 3 hours later, Joya returned to the Birmingham precinct with a new box in hand. Detective Simone Garner met her at the steps. What's that? She asked. Evidence, Joya said. Testimonies. Memo from the sheriff himself. It proves a coordinated cover-up. Jake Sims just agreed to sign an affidavit and testify in court. Simone blinked. You're blowing the roof off a church, a sheriff's department, in a town that's built its reputation on respectability. You ready for what comes next? No, Joya said, but I'm not doing it alone. Behind her, Melinda stepped out of the car. So did Carmen Lynn and Elwood. Even Miss Hattie, supported on a cane, but standing tall. Simone gave a tight smile. Then let's take it to the D. That evening, a formal arrest warrant was filed for Harold Morgan. The charge, first-degree murder. Another warrant followed for obstruction of justice against Sheriff Clay Marston, who quietly resigned before the ink dried. The story broke within hours. First on local blogs. Then news vans rolled into town. Headlines hit Facebook. Cold case from 1997 reopened in Mason Ridge. Local deacon named in murder of Black choir boy. Sheriff cover-up alleged. Victim's body recovered after 2 decades. Outside St. Luke's, someone spray-painted the word liar across the brick wall beneath the stained glass window. The choir canceled rehearsal. Church mothers locked their doors. But it was too late. The silence had cracked. That night, Joya sat alone in her childhood room. She unfolded one of her mother's letters, reading the lines by lamplight. Then she pulled out a small object from her coat pocket, the cassette tape from Carmen. She held it in her palm, turning it over. Beside it, she placed the diary. 2 voices. A boy's pain, and a whole town that chose not to hear him. But now the world would listen. Tomorrow was the arraignment. And for the first time in 28 years, Ellis Ray Whitaker's name would be spoken in a courtroom out loud, on record, and with truth beside it. The Mason County Courthouse buzzed like a cracked hive. Reporters lined the steps, jostling for angles. Locals gathered in murmurs, some in support, others with scowls and sideways glances, their Sunday civility cracking under the weight of long-buried truths. Inside, the old oak-paneled courtroom smelled like paper, sweat, and bleach scrubbed clean in a hurry, as if the building could somehow wash away what it was about to hold. Joya sat in the front row, flanked by Melinda Whitaker and Detective Simone Garner, the diary in her hands, and Ellis's tape copied onto an admissible USB in her coat pocket. Behind them sat Carmen Lynn, Elwood Daniels, Miss Hattie, and even Jake Sims sober, steady, sweating through his shirt collar, but sitting tall. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the bailiff called court into session, and they brought him in. Harold Morgan, hands cuffed, suit still pressed but loose on his shrinking frame. He avoided Joya's eyes, but she didn't flinch. He was no longer a pulpit shadow or whispered legend. He was just a man. And today he would answer. The DA's presentation was calm and relentless. A timeline of Ellis's final days. Carmen Lynn's recorded audio played aloud, Ellis's voice echoing through the room like a ghost exhaling truth. Photos of the lake-bed bones. The diary's excerpts, read without embellishment. Testimonies from Miss Hattie, Elwood, and finally Jake Sims, who swallowed his guilt with every word but told the truth anyway. And then they called Joya Banks to the stand. She sat tall under oath, hand steady on the Bible. "I came back for a funeral," she said, "but I stayed for Ellis." The courtroom stilled as she described the attic discovery, the unmailed letters, the fear that ruled Mason Ridge like scripture, and the silence she refused to inherit. When she stepped down, no one clapped. They just sat there broken open. The judge ruled that Harold Morgan would stand trial for murder and aggravated sexual abuse of a minor, with bail denied due to risk of flight and community influence. The sheriff's resignation became official within the hour. Civil suits followed. St. Luke's Baptist Church went quiet. No choir rehearsals. No Sunday bulletin. No more praise under stained glass that had hidden so many sins. 2 weeks later, Joya stood at the edge of Lake Dorset, Ellis's diary in her hand. The water had stilled again. The reeds bent in the breeze. The makeshift memorial sat under the trees, now candles, notes, flowers, a choir pin rusting against a photo of a brown-skinned boy with shy eyes and a crooked smile. Melinda stood beside her, holding a small box. "You sure?" she asked. Joya nodded. They opened the box together. Inside, a pair of choir gloves. Ellis's, recovered from a long-forgotten trunk. Folded neatly next to them was a cassette tape, the original one, the one Ellis never finished recording. Joya took the gloves and dropped them gently into the lake, watching as they floated, then sank. "Rest now," she whispered. "We heard you." That night, She packed her suitcase in the room she'd once shared with echoes. The letters from her mother kept. The diary archived. The town changed, even if only a little. Melinda hugged her at the front steps, tears in her throat. "You gave us peace," she said. "No," Joya replied. "Ellis did." She got into her car, the early morning light brushing the rearview mirror. As she drove away, Mason Ridge receded behind her, still haunted, still cracked, but now no longer quiet. Because silence, once broken, can never go back to being whole. They called it a drowning, until a black detective found the boy's diary. What you just heard wasn't the full story. It was the part someone tried to bury. The part that didn't fit the headline. The part where a person, not a suspect, was lost in the process. This case showed us what happens when the system moves too fast, or not at all. When suspicion weighs more than truth. When justice shows up late, or never. But here's the thing. If these stories don't leave us asking questions, they'll keep repeating with different names. So if this one meant something to you, don't just move on. Talk about it. Question it. Pass it on. Because silence protects the wrong side of history. And sometimes, the only thing standing between truth and erasure is someone who chooses to care. Like, share, comment. Let the next chapter begin with awareness, not regret.